Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's first ever virtual compliance assistance conference. My name is Dan Sowery with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I'll be moderating this morning's presentation. Jason Fife, Environmental Supervisor from our Division of Surface Water, will be our presenter this morning, along with program experts in the background to address regulatory questions during the presentation. And with that, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate and engage with our presenter during this morning's session. On this slide here, you will see a screenshot and an example of an attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on the right-hand side of your screen. For this webinar, you are listening in using your computer audio. If you're having sound issues, try refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, log off and log back in or check your computer's audio settings. Please feel free to submit questions to the presenter by typing them into the questions pane on your control panel. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation. And if we don't answer your question during the presentation or during the Q&A portion, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email along with the session survey. The session survey will also appear once the webinar ends. We value your feedback and would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing and to let us know if there's anything else that we can do to further assist you. A certificate of attendance will also be included via email about a day or so after the session. This session has been approved for 1 hour of registered sanitarian and sanitarian in training credit, 1 contact hour of wastewater operator certification, and 1 BMP hour towards annual educational requirements for C&DD certified operators. If you did not submit your professional certification number in the CEU ID number box when registering, please make sure you provide us with your number through the Q&A feature. Please keep in mind, to receive credit for the wastewater operator certification, you must attend this full session, and the session must be the primary window open on your screen for more than 90% of the time. You must also participate in all of the live polls. Attendees seeking American Planning Association credit may do so through APA's self-reporting option. Log into your My APA account and select the self-reported credits option to receive credit. If you're seeking other CEUs, please refer to our conference agenda available as a handout to this morning's presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Fife from Ohio EPA's Division of Surface Water.
Thank you, Dan. As Dan said, my name is Jason Fife. I'm with the Ohio EPA's Division of Surface Water and the Stormwater Program. And today's presentations will focus on Ohio EPA's NPDES Industrial Stormwater General Permit. So some learning objectives. So hopefully after conclusion of this presentation, participants will be able to identify what activities are subject to NPDES stormwater regulations, know where to go to find that. Participants should be able to determine if their facility is subject to Ohio EPA's NPDES Industrial Stormwater General Permit. We commonly refer to it as an MSGP. It's a multi-sector general permit. That's where those letters come from. Also, participants will know how to apply for the Industrial Stormwater General Permit. Participants will understand the requirements of the Industrial Stormwater Permit. And then lastly, participants will learn where to obtain useful resources that Ohio EPA has on our website and other locations. With the Ohio EPA's stormwater program, within the program, we kind of have 3 different programs. We have a construction stormwater program that applies to any construction activities that disturb 1 or more acres of land. We also have a municipal separate storm sewer system program. This is commonly referred to as an MS4 program, and this is applicable to communities in Ohio that are located within urbanized areas. So within the highly densely populated areas of the state, communities are required to have local stormwater programs, and Ohio EPA has permits for that. And today's focus will be over Ohio EPA's industrial stormwater program. So NPDES program for stormwater. To be subject to the NPDES stormwater program, you need to have a discharge to water the state, and/or you could have a discharge of stormwater from your facility to a MS4, so to a roadside ditch or to a city storm sewer that ultimately discharges to a water to the state. So that's one of the first criteria. Our program does not include discharges to sanitary sewers, nor to combined sewer systems. If your facility is located in a combined sewer area, and all stormwater from your facility discharges to a city's combined sewer system, then you would not be subject to NPDES stormwater regulations through Ohio EPA. However, we would always say you need to contact the local community that owns that combined sewer system, as they may have requirements for you since you're discharging to their system. Moving on. Here's 11 categories of industrial activity. Basically, Ohio EPA's rules mirror US EPA's federal regulations, which identify these 11 categories of industrial activity, which are subject to NPDES stormwater permitting. And within these 11 categories, the federal regulations and Ohio EPA's mirrors those regulations. Facilities are identified by standard industrial classification codes, so SIC codes. So the regulations will spell out what SIC codes are subject to stormwater permitting. There's also within the regulations a few facilities that are identified by a narrative description. An example would be a wastewater treatment plant, which has a design flow of 1 MGD or greater. So that's identified by a narrative description. Within the permit itself, Appendix D of our industrial stormwater general permit, it lists out all the different facilities by SIC codes and narrative descriptions which are subject to that permit. So you can look at Appendix D of the permit, or also within Ohio EPA's rules to identify those facilities which are subject to NPDES industrial stormwater permitting. If for facilities that are subject to industrial stormwater permits, there's two options for permitting. One, you can obtain general stormwater permit coverage, or some facilities are covered under individual NPDES permits for their stormwater discharges. This is very common for facilities that already have an NPDES permit for a wastewater discharge. And for facilities like that, so they only have one permit instead of having two, Ohio EPA puts the stormwater requirements within their individual NPDES permit. It's typically referred to as parts 4, 5, and 6 of their general permit, or of their individual permit. But for facilities that have general permit coverage, to obtain coverage, a facility would need to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan and submit a notice of intent, an NOI application. And there is a $350 application fee associated with submitting that NOI for obtaining coverage under the industrial stormwater general permit. In Ohio, we're currently in our 6th generation of our industrial stormwater general permit. Our general permit is, as I said earlier, we kind of refer to it as a multi-sector permit. And it's mostly consistent with US EPA's multi-sector general permit. As the permit is set up in where parts 1 through 5 of the permit apply to everybody that's covered under that permit. Parts 6 and 7 deal with, part 6 deals with if for facilities that are subject to any benchmark and/or annual effluent monitoring. And part 7 of the permit deals with the record keeping and reporting requirements. Facilities in part 8 of the permit, that's where the permit spells out specific BMPs and benchmark monitoring requirements that are applicable for facilities based on their SIC code. So part 8, and you can go to Appendix D of the permit, and based on your SIC code, that'll tell you what sector in part 8 of the permit that your facility is subject to. In comparison to US EPA's multi-sector general permit, Ohio's does not include certain facilities that US EPA's does. For some examples here, petroleum bulk stations and terminals and coal surface mining, Ohio EPA has specific general permits for those two types of facilities. Phosphatic fertilizer manufacturers, Ohio EPA has elected to put those under individual permits. Metal mining, active landfills, we put under individual permits. And any facility that would have coverage under the general permit, if it's ever determined that the facility is having issues with stormwater discharges that are violating water quality standards, then the permit basically would say you're not eligible and you need to obtain coverage under an NPDES individual permit. And then for any new discharges, and this is based upon Ohio's anti-degradation regulations, any new discharge, so if a facility come in today trying to get coverage under the multi-sector general permit, that they had stormwater discharges to some of Ohio's best surface waters, ones that's been designated as superior high quality waters, outstanding state waters, and outstanding national resource waters. If you had stormwater discharges to those facilities, you wouldn't, to those type streams, you would not be eligible for general permit coverage and would require to obtain coverage under individual permit. And the date of that is the February 10th, 96 date. So facilities that have coverage under Ohio's general permit prior to February 10th that have maintained continuous coverage, even if they was to discharge those superior waters, they can still renew their coverage under the general permit going forward. To obtain coverage under the general permit, Ohio EPA Division of Surface Water has pretty much went to all electronic applications now. So you need to go in, set up an e-business center account, and go into the system. And it's called Streams. And basically, you go in there, fill out your notice of intent form, submit it electronically, pay your fees electronically, and when Ohio EPA issues your permit, that's all done electronically through the system. No exposure certifications. Within the stormwater regulations, if you have an SIC code or a narrative description that makes you your facility subject to NPDES industrial stormwater, there is language within the regulations that says, okay, you're subject, but all your industrial materials and activities are indoors, or they're not exposed to stormwater. So therefore, there is a caveat in the regulation that says if you don't have none of your industrial materials or activities are exposed, you won't need to obtain a permit. You just need to certify no exposure. And with the certification for no exposure, you have to submit that every 5 years. And you're basically certifying that all your industrial materials and activities are protected by a storm-resistant shelter to prevent exposure to rain, snow, snowmelt, and/or runoff. And again, the only requirement is to recertify that every 5 years, assuming that no exposure still exists. And you'd also submit the no exposure certification through Ohio's e-business center. The link at the bottom there is to a US EPA guidance manual. It's pretty good. I mean, it's an older manual, but still pretty good. It goes through and has a lot of explanation for the no exposure certification, and it's a really good document to look at. So what is a storm-resistant shelter? That could be, in regards to no exposure, it could be a completely roofed and walled building or structure. It also could be a structure with only a top cover but no side covers, provided that materials do not otherwise come into contact with run-on or snowmelt and subsequently run off. So some pictures at the bottom. The one at the far right, that's obviously a bin that's exposed, so that would not be no exposure. And the two on the left are not exposed as long as they're remain lidded and are in good condition with no leaks. The regulations do have some exceptions to storm-resistant shelters. That would be for tanks, drums, or barrels. Those can be stored outside and exposed to stormwater as long as the drums and barrels are sealed with no operational valves. They're in good condition. And there's no transfer material to or from that container outdoors. So that would have to be done indoors, but then they could be stored outdoors as long as it's in good condition. Another exception is adequately maintained vehicles. So this could, like an example, could be like forklifts and trucks at an industrial facility that travel from building to building outdoors. As long as those vehicles are maintained and not leaking oil and stuff, those would not be considered exposure. So just some pictures, examples, exposure or no exposure. The top left, that's obviously exposure. The used oil tank, drum, obviously you can see where they got the funnel where they transfer used oil into it outdoors. That would make it exposure. The top right, that could be no exposure, as long as no materials being transferred into those drums outside, and they're sealed and banded, and they're in good condition, not leaking. And the bottom right, that's obviously exposure, and the bottom left, that could be no exposure as long as all the loading and mixing occurs under the canopy. So NPDES or no exposure. So kind of a little flow chart here. Do you have a discharge, as we've kind of talked through here? Do you have a stormwater discharge to a surface water or storm sewer system? If yes, does your facility fall under any of the SIC codes or narrative descriptions that's identified in the regulations, and/or you can also look at Appendix D of our multi-sector general permit? And if yes, then first thing to look at is, can my facility certify no exposure? Is there anything we could just move indoors to certify no exposure? That way we don't need to submit and obtain an NPDES stormwater permit. We've come to our first poll question. Does your facility have an NPDES industrial stormwater coverage?
Hi, everyone. This is Dan. The polls have been launched. Go ahead and make your selection. All right. Most folks have submitted their responses. Let's give it a few more seconds. We'll close the polls and share the results.
It looks like the results have come in. Looks like about 55% of people say yes. They do have an NPDES industrial stormwater permit. 34% say no, and 11% say not sure. So let's move on to the next slide. Complying with the NPDES permit. The general permit's going to require your facility to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan. And the main thing with that stormwater pollution prevention plan is implementing various control measures and best management practices to try to minimize the amount of pollutants that are discharged within a facility's stormwater discharges. So the main components of the stormwater pollution prevention plan is a pollution prevention team, a site description, and we'll go through these more detail. A summary of potential pollutant sources at your facility. A description of control measures that you're going to implement to try to minimize pollutants in your stormwater discharges. Schedules and procedures for good housekeeping, maintenance, spill prevention and response, employee training, and monitoring and inspection. And we'll get into all these in a little more detail. The pollution prevention team. Your stormwater pollution prevention plan needs to identify the people who are responsible for implementing your stormwater pollution prevention team. The permit says you can identify those by name or title. And you need to specify the responsibilities of those people, if it's 1 people or 10, and provide emergency contact information. One thing with the plan, it should be updated if people change. The plan needs to be updated to reflect that. The stormwater pollution prevention team should meet regularly, at least once per year. And the team needs to review the effectiveness of your control measures. So review what practices are being implemented at the site. Are they effective, or can we do something better? What's not working? And then update the stormwater pollution prevention plan as needed. Potential pollutant sources, just some typical areas at facilities that have potential pollutant sources: storage tanks, including fueling stations, various stockpiles of materials, dumpsters, loading docks, rail lines, dust collectors, scrap bins, areas with bare soils or where construction may be occurring at the site, have exposed sediment, and outdoor manufacturing areas. These are some of the common potential pollutant source areas at various industrial facilities. The site drainage map, this is really important for facilities. It should identify the location of those pollutant sources and various controls that you're going to be implementing to try to minimize pollutant discharges. Drainage patterns, this could include both your storm sewers, catch basins, and then also any sheet flow that may leave the site over land and not be discharged through a storm sewer. And then also delineate the watersheds, what's the different watersheds at your facility. Points of discharge, outfalls. A lot of times I know we get calls from facilities and they're kind of wondering, where do we take our stormwater samples? And you should be able to look in your stormwater pollution prevention plan, and it should identify where your points of discharge are and where you'll be taking those samples. And then also the plan or the drainage map should also identify the name of all receiving streams and/or any local MS4 storm sewer systems. So it might be a roadside ditch, and/or it might be the city or village's storm sewer system. Non-stormwater discharge certification. The permit does require facilities to certify that they've evaluated they have no non-stormwater discharges from their facility. So this could be, a sanitary sanitary discharge into your storm, accidentally connected to your storm and having a discharge. It might be, sink drains, floor drains. But the permit does require that facilities do a system check at a facility, dry weather screen their outfalls, and try to determine if they are having any non-stormwater discharges that shouldn't be discharging through their storm sewer system. If they was to find any, the permit would require they be eliminated. One common question we get is, I'm a facility that's had a permit for 3 generations. I've already done this non-stormwater certification 10 years ago. Do I need to do it again when I renew my permit? And basically, our response that's been, if there's been no major construction or anything like that that's been done at your facility where there would be a chance to have a cross connection of some kind to your storm sewer system, then you would not need to redo it again. But we would say that if there has been some remodeling and major work done at your facility where that would be a possibility, then a facility should go ahead and do the non-stormwater certification again and make sure that there is no non-stormwater discharges to their system. The general permit does identify some permissible discharges that are non-stormwater, but they are allowed. So firefighting activities, if there was a true fire event, those discharges would be authorized, as you see in parentheses, non-planned. This is consistent with federal regulations. So if for any type of facility doing a planned firefighting event, those discharges would not be authorized by the permit and need to be collected and dealt with appropriately. Potable water, uncontaminated drinking water, contaminated condensate, landscape watering, pavement wash water, and external building wash down. Those are allowable discharges as long as no detergents are used. And you must, I think we got a slide that talks a little more about that. For the non-stormwater discharges for exterior washing. Again, the permit does authorize routine external building wash down without detergents. So if you're just using water. For pavement wash water where spills or leaks have not occurred and without detergents, the permit does indicate you need to implement some control measures. So, maybe sweep the pavement before it's washed and then implement some type of control measures. Maybe try to direct it to a grassed area or try to have it go through something to try to minimize the amount of solids that might be discharged. So it does require control measures to be implemented. Regarding control measures with the stormwater pollution prevention plan, the permit does identify various, control measures that need to be implemented. And basically, like I said, parts 1 through 5 of the permit apply to everybody, and those will identify some control measures that everybody's plan must include. And then you need to look at Appendix B of the permit, and based on your SIC code, that'll tell you which sector in Part 8 of the permit is applicable to your facility. And in Part 8 of the permit would identify specific BMPs based upon your type of facility that your stormwater pollution prevention plan would need to include and need to be implemented. The link at the very bottom of the slide, US EPA has developed guidance documents that for every industrial sector that's in Part 8 of the permit. And those are really good documents that to look at for your facility. Regarding control measures, these are just best management practices. So, one of the big things is just try to use common sense when selecting BMPs. A lot of times it just involves curbing, diking, tarping, moving things indoors if possible, and then just general sediment erosion control at your facility. Regarding SPCC or other spill control plans, that is one of the control measures that the permit does require. If your facility already has an SPCC plan, obviously you can just utilize that to address that control measure in the permit. And then don't overlook the value of regular employee training. The permit does require at least an annual employee training regarding your stormwater pollution prevention plan. But obviously, maybe more frequent trainings could be better, or especially like if the facility has a lot of turnover. Now let's go through a few slides of some common areas where pollutant sources we commonly see are, and some good and bad examples. The picture on the left, the vehicle maintenance, it is performed indoors, which is great. And they, with the floor drain connected to the sanitary or plugged. The picture to the right, they're doing the maintenance outdoors, and it's in close proximity to a storm drain, which would not be good practice. Equipment storage, basically, when equipment's being stored, if it's possible, all fluid should be drained before storing or use drip pans for any leakage. If possible, put underneath overhangs. And then also use absorbents to clean up any spills. And facilities should have like spill kits and stuff available to do that. Vehicle washing. We see this quite a bit. Facilities washing vehicles outdoors. And again, this base of the wash water comes off these. It's not storm water. It's technically a wastewater, so it cannot be discharged via your NPDES stormwater permit. Some viable options would be to use just a standard commercial car wash if possible, or for some facilities have actually created wash bays and connected that to the sanitary sewer. Material storage, just a good practice is store materials indoors, neat and orderly. Don't store things outside. And then definitely, if it was to be stored outside, try not to store it in close proximity to a storm drain. Salt storage. Now, the permit does require that if you have any salt storage at your industrial facility, that it must be covered. So obviously, the pictures, the one on the left's a good, nice salt dome. The one on the right, salt just bulging out of it. Fueling stations, some good practices at fueling stations is to have auto and emergency shutoffs for the fuel pump. Keep a spill kit nearby, and make sure as part of your program, your stormwater pollution prevention plan, that those maintenance kits are checked regularly and refilled if needed. And then obviously the picture on the right, no spill kit was available. Pretty messy, stains, spills. Fuel tanks, secondary containment is a great practice. The picture on the right, it had dikes on all sides, 3 sides of it, except for the side that was draining downslope of the storm drain being downslope of that. Dumpster management. With dumpsters, facilities should try to keep dumpsters that are in good condition. They're not leaking, they're not ruptured. And then lids. We try to make sure that employees keep the lids closed on the dumpsters. Scrap materials in your yard. Good practice is try to recycle or salvage any material that you can, and what you can't quickly dispose of. Any type of machinery or vehicles be stored outside if possible, drain fluid from them prior to doing so. And we come up to our second poll. The question is, discharges from planned firefighting exercises are an authorized discharge under the NPDES Industrial Stormwater General Permit.
All right, we have opened the polls. Once this shows up on your screen, please make your selections. So roughly 70% of folks have responded. Let's give it a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to close the polls and share the results.
Okay, based on the results, 50% said that it's true, 50% false. The correct answer is, from a planned firefighting exercise. This is something that's planned. Maybe your firefighters are having a practice exercise of putting out some type of fire. And in those cases, that would not be an authorized discharge under your stormwater permit. That would be considered wastewater, and you'd be required to basically plan for how to capture that firefighting wash waters and deal with them appropriately. So moving on to our next slide. Inspections and monitoring. So the permit, part 4 of the permit deals with inspections. And all facilities covered under the permit are required to perform routine facility inspections. So must inspect once per quarter. And areas that should be inspected are areas where industrial materials or activities are exposed to stormwater. And also, inspection should look at any stormwater control measures that you have to make sure they're adequately working and being maintained. There are certain sectors of industrial facilities under the permit that have more frequent inspections, and those are identified in Part 8 of the permit. So, based on your SIC code, when you go to the sector in Part 8 of your permit, there are a few sectors of the permit that require monthly inspections in lieu of quarterly. The permit does say that with the routine facility inspection, you need to perform while the facility is in operation. And then routine facility inspections need to be documented and maintained on site with your stormwater pollution prevention plan. And there'll be a link at the end of this presentation where we have example template routine facility inspection documents that facilities can use to document their routine facility inspections. Some other required record keeping by the permit. You need to keep a log of any spills, leaks, or other releases that you have in your facility. The permit requires that you document your employee training that you conducted, any maintenance records for control measures, and the permit requires that all records, inspection reports, monitoring data, et cetera, be maintained for 3 years after the date that coverage under the permit expires or is terminated. Quarterly visual assessments. This is a requirement for all facilities covered by the permit. This is a simple grab sample that you're basically just visually looking at the sample, for color, odor, clarity, floating solids, suspended solids, foam, oil sheens, any other obvious indicators of stormwater pollution. So it's not required to be sent off to a lab or anything. It's just a visual sample of a grab sample. A visual assessment of the grab sample. The permit requires that this grab sample be taken during the first 30 minutes of a discharge, and it needs to be at least 3 days after the previous rain event. So basically, we want at least 3 days for not allowing Mother Nature to wash off pollutants to kind of give you a good representative sample. The permit does have language regarding what is referred to as substantially identical outfalls. And basically what this is, a substantially identical outfall is you have 2 outfalls, and the drainage area to those outfalls, you basically have the same industrial activities going on, the same materials are stored there. The permit says instead of taking a grab sample at each of those 2 outfalls, you can only, you don't have to take a sample of one of them. And then the permit would just stipulate that the next quarter you rotate and take a sample of the other. The permit does have analytical monitoring. So this would be, grab samples that would be taken and actually have to be sent to a lab to be analyzed. The permit, and this would be for benchmark monitoring and annual effluent limitation monitoring. And within the permit, there's 29 sectors of the permit. And again, this is all, to determine this, you look at Part 8 of the permit based on your SIC code. 19 of the 29 sectors are subject to the benchmark monitoring, and just a handful of facilities are subject to the effluent limitation monitoring. So if your facility is subject to benchmark monitoring or annual effluent limitation monitoring, it's sort of similar to the visual grab sample, the visual assessments. You need to pull the sample within the first 30 minutes of discharge. It needs at least to be 3 days from the previous storm event. And for benchmark monitoring and the annual effluent monitoring, those samples would need to be You need to coordinate with the lab, and those samples will need to be submitted to the lab. And the permit stipulates that you need to go into EDMR, found within Ohio's e-business center, and submit your lab results within 30 days of when you get your results back from the lab. Again, benchmark monitoring is applicable to 19 to 29 sectors. Here's a common question we get a lot is, a facility may have, a primary SIC code and other secondary SIC codes. If that's the case, if your facility has more than one SIC code, it's possible that you could be subject to more than one sector of the permit. If that's the case, you would need to, your plan would need to implement any BMPs identified in both sectors found in Part A of the permit, as well as if there would be any benchmark monitoring for both those sectors, you would be required to perform that. Regarding the benchmark monitoring, for facilities that are kind of familiar with US EPA's benchmark monitoring, Ohio's general permit's a little more flexible than that. With Ohio's permit, you're given the first 3 years of your permit coverage to take 4 samples. So if your sector or the permit says you need to take TSS, you basically have the first 12 quarters to take 4 samples. The only stipulation is each sample needs to represent a calendar quarter. So you could go ahead and complete your benchmark monitoring during the first year of your permit coverage, just taking a sample each quarter, or you could basically drag it out over 3 years to get a sample from each calendar quarter. That's the flexibility of the permit. After you take your 3, or after you get your 4 samples, you would need to average those and compare it to the benchmark value in the permit. And for example, for TSS, it's 100 milligrams per liter. So if you're below that 100 for TSS, basically, if the permit's saying, okay, your stormwater pollution prevention plan is being adequately implemented, just keep doing what you're doing. If you was to exceed the benchmark based on your 4 samples, average of your 4 samples, it's not a violation. Okay, that's very important to point out. The benchmarks are more of an indicator of good implementation. So exceedance of a benchmark value is not a violation. It's simply a red flag that maybe you need to do a little bit more to try to get that value down. So if you was to exceed the benchmark based upon an average of your 4 samples, you would then go to Part 3 of the permit, and it would spell out for you how to go through and try to, you'd have to document, here's what we're going to try to do, here's some additional BMPs, this is what we want to try to do to get that TSS value down. But the permit would not require you to do any additional sampling during this term of the permit. So there is some deviation there from the way the US EPA's permit is, but with Ohio's permit, you take those 4 samples and you're done doing the benchmark monitoring for that permit term. But again, if you exceed the average, or your average exceeds the benchmark value, then you may need to document and look at doing some more to try to get that value down. Effluent limitation guidelines, there's very few facilities that are subject to this. Now with these are actually limits. So a violation of these, your sample violates these, and it would be an actual violation. And with the effluent limitation monitoring, again, that'll be facilities can find out whether they're subject to that based upon the sector that they're located within in Part 8 of the permit. And with that, it's very similar to the benchmark monitoring. It's just a grab sample. With this, though, you cannot use the substantially identical outfalls. So if you had 2 outfalls that were substantially identical, you would still need to take a grab sample from each and send that off to the lab to be analyzed. Other monitoring, I mean, the permit does give the director authority to, maybe based upon a facility's compliance and issues they may be having, to potentially require additional monitoring other than what is found within the sector that the facility is located in. That would be an option, or maybe require the facility to go under an individual permit. Corrective action. This is found in Part 3 of the permit. So there are some types of some things that would trigger corrective action in Part 3 of the permit. Some true permit violations. So you have an unauthorized release or discharge from like a spill or something. Violation of a numeric effluent limit. Or an inspection finds that control measures are not properly operated and maintained. So things like that would actually be permit violations and would trigger you to go through the corrective actions in Part 3 of the permit. Others would be indications of potential problems. So significant change in the facility operation changes the quantity or nature of pollutants discharged. Or an exceedance of a benchmark value. Again, it's not a permit violation, it's just a red flag. So these type of activities would require you to go through Part 3 of the permit and corrective actions. The permit stipulates that within 24 hours of when you find this out, you, within your plan, and you document this and keep it with your stormwater pollution prevention plan, you describe the problem identified and document the date the problem was identified. Within 30 days, summarize the corrective actions you're going to take, that you've taken or will be taking, and the basis for determining that no action is needed. The document date, corrective action initiated, completed, or expected to be completed. So basically, the permit requires you to document what you're going to do and when you do it. The permit does require that an annual report be completed for all facilities covered under the permit. Ohio EPA currently does not require this annual report be submitted to Ohio EPA. The permit just requires that you complete the annual report, and it's an appendix to the permit, which you would fill out, and you maintain that annual report with your stormwater pollution prevention plan and have it available if your site was inspected or if Ohio EPA was to request your annual reports. This link here, or this website here, that's from Ohio EPA's website. And basically from here, we got a lot of good guidance documents. We've got template stormwater pollution prevention plans within a Word document that would help you complete a stormwater pollution prevention plan for your facility. We have sample record keeping template documents for doing your quarterly visual inspections, your quarterly routine inspections, your benchmark monitoring. So there's a lot of good guidance available from this website that would help facilities when developing their stormwater pollution prevention plan and implementing their program. And we've come up to our last poll. The question here is, grab samples for quarterly visual monitoring and benchmark monitoring are to be collected within the first blank minutes of a stormwater discharge.
Okay, polls have been launched. When this shows up on your screen, make your selections. We'll give everybody approximately 1 minute. Okay, we have about 70% of folks have voted. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we will close the polls and share the results.
And it looks like the results are in. About 6% said within the first 10 minutes, 81% within the first 30, which is correct. Yeah, the permit requires that your quarterly visual assessment and your benchmark monitoring that those grab samples be collected within the first 30 minutes of the stormwater discharge. And that's to try to, get that first flush of pollutants. So you got a representative sample. If you wait, you had an hour and a half rain event and you pull the sample at the very end, a lot of the facility's going to be basically washed off. So 30 minutes was the correct answer. Moving on to our next slide. I'm about done here, about running out of time too. Some key takeaways. So I think it's very important for folks, if you do have coverage under the permit, read the permit and try to familiarize yourself with the requirements of the permit. And obviously, Ohio EPA is always available to help answer questions and do what we can for facilities. Remember to conduct your employee training. The permit does require at least an annual employee training. Perform routine facility inspections. The permit requires those to be performed at least on a quarterly basis. Complete quarterly visual assessments and complete benchmark monitoring if it is required for your facility. And again, you'll based upon your SIC code, with Appendix D of the permit, that'll tell you what sector in Part A of the permit applies to you, and that'll tell you whether or not you have any benchmark monitoring requirements. And then lastly, documentation and records. And again, that previous website, there's some templates for folks to use to document all your inspections and everything, your employee training that's required by the permit. So please document those actions and maintain them with your stormwater pollution prevention plan. The slide here basically identifies Ohio EPA stormwater personnel based upon our 5 districts and also our central office. And, to contact anybody, it's their first name dot last name at epa.ohio.gov. And our stormwater webpage is down at the very bottom right-hand corner, where there's a lot of useful information. And with that, we can take questions if we have any for maybe 4 minutes.
Thank you, Jason. So we're going to begin answering questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. But if we do not answer your question, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. So, Mr. Fife, our first question is, if I cover my scrap metal or waste dumpster with a tarp, does my facility qualify for the no exposure exclusion?
Tarps, if you look at the no exposure guidance document that was put up on those previous slides, tarps are considered really, it needs to be a permanent fixture structure. Tarps are considered to be temporary. So it's like when you look at the guidance, federal guidance, if your facility was under some type of construction and you had to move something outside and it was just going to be for a short period of time, you could use just a tarp to cover that and still maintain your no exposure certification. However, basically tarps are for temporary purposes. So it needs to be more of a better than a tarp, more of a fixed structure in order to have no exposure.
Okay, and kind of along the same lines, here's another question. If I have a berm around my fuel tank or tank farm, does my facility qualify for the no exposure exclusion, or does the area have to be roofed?
Dan, can you say the first part of that? I didn't catch it. What was around your?
Yeah, if I have a berm around my fuel tank or tank farm, does my facility qualify for the no exposure exclusion, or does the area have to be under roof?
That might be a good, can I get one of my technical experts on here to help me with this one? Dan Bogowski?
Absolutely. So Dan, if you'd like to unmute yourself, there you go.
Sure. Hello, everybody. To qualify for the no exposure exclusion, those fuel tanks or whatever's in that area would have to have no operational valves or taps. So it would depend on that. So likely, if you're going to have a fuel storage area outside and you will be fueling vehicles and so forth outside, you'd have to have the area roofed in order to really qualify for the no exposure.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Our next question is, do I have to submit my routine facility inspection, quarterly visual assessment, or annual reports to Ohio EPA?
This is Jason. I can take that one. No, the permit does not require any of those to be submitted to Ohio EPA unless specifically requested. The permit would just simply require that all those documents be maintained at the site with your stormwater pollution prevention plan and available for review during the inspection, or as I indicated, if requested.
Okay, perfect. And this question just came in. Does a facility with an industrial stormwater permit need a stormwater permit for construction?
That's a good question. The answer is yes. When one of his previous slides, the construction is identified as one of those industrial activities needing NPDES stormwater coverage. Ohio, like pretty much every state and US EPA, has a specific general permit for construction activities. So I guess the key is, though, if it's 1 acre or greater. So if your facilities want to have a construction project that will disturb 1 or more acres, you also would need to obtain coverage under an NPDES construction stormwater permit.
Perfect. And we're going to take one more question because we are about out of time. How am I supposed to collect my samples in the first 30 minutes of discharge if the rain event occurs at a time when my facility is unstaffed? Do you expect me to come in at 2 a.m. on Saturday just to collect the stormwater sample?
This is Jason. I can take this one. With the permit, it's for like benchmark monitoring. Again, it's you need to have a sample that represents each calendar quarter, and we tried to build in flexibility with that. To give you 3 years. So the hope would be there would be a rain event when during normal business hours per se, when staff would be there to pull that sample. So that's, and then with the quarterly, visual assessment, that would be the hope as well, is that sometime during that quarter, there would be a rain event that would be during normal business hours, that a staff person could grab a sample. Dan, Bogowski or Lynette, is there anything you want to add to that?
I'm sorry, Jason, I was answering questions in the chat box. I didn't hear the question.
That's okay. I think that answers it, Dan.
All right. Well, we are out of time. The attendees have submitted some really, really good questions, so we'll be sure to get back to those questions following today's webinar. I'd like to thank Jason Fife for your excellent presentation. Also, thank you, experts behind the scenes, Dan Bogowski and Lynette Haviland. Thank you very much for helping to field the questions during today's presentation. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey, and we value your feedback, and we greatly appreciate it if you would let us know how we are doing, and to let us know if there's anything that we can do to further assist you. A certificate of attendance will be included via email about a day or so after this session, and due to the connectivity issues we had at the beginning of this presentation, we will re-record this presentation and send the recording via email by the end of this week. Join us this afternoon at 2 p.m. to hear from Walter Aris in Ohio EPA's Division of Surface Water to learn about new and proposed rules and policies regarding NPDES permitting. You may also be interested in a session scheduled for 10 a.m. this Thursday on how to prepare a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So if you've not already registered for these sessions or other upcoming sessions, please check out our conference agenda attached as a handout to this morning's presentation. And with that, thank you for joining us this morning and have a great day.